when people walked in, they went, "This is so obvious. Why hasn't somebody done this before?" And that's what entrepreneurs can do, because if you're a big company, you have to have a great big whiteboard and everything gets debated. But if you're an entrepreneur, you just got a vision and you go for it. You can do what you want. You've got to build something that looks so real that people believe you. And you can only have people believe you if you believe it yourself. For the most part, I did believe that that would be a success. I always say 90% I believed it, 5% I had my doubts, and 5% was sleepless nights of sheer terror. I don't think there was ever pressure to do better. Pressure for me has always come from survival. I never wanted to be very, very rich and very, very famous and very, very successful. I always wanted to not be very, very poor. That was my motivation.
Tell us, where were you in life? What were you doing? And ultimately, what made you say, screw it, just do it?
Screw it, let's do it. I was 45. I'd been in I left school with 2 O-levels. I'd been in the rock and roll business. I'd been in the television business. I'd made films. I'd lots of things. I've had small businesses. And for the 3rd or 4th time in my life, I was lost and I was down on my luck. And I thought, I've got to do something. And I started taking out people who, how can I describe? Well, maybe people who I was a bit in awe of or scared of. And one of them was a guy called Mr. Uehara from Fuji Sankei Television. And he kindly took me out to lunch at a sushi restaurant. We were having lunch and eating sushi. And he said, "What are you going to do?" And I said, "Well, I'm just looking for opportunities." And I said, "We're here. What about sushi? It's not taken off here." And he said the famous words, which were, "What you should do, Simon, is a conveyor belt sushi bar with girls in black PVC miniskirts." That's what happened. And 2 years later, 1997, January 22nd, actually, I opened the first one.
Wow. And before that point, then, I guess maybe there wasn't anything holding you back because you hadn't had that opportunity, hadn't presented itself, right?
Well, there's nothing holding me back other than the fact that I was running out of money, and I'm not pleading complete poverty, but having had all those businesses and all the ups and downs of life, I had and the property values going up in this world, I had 200 grand tied up in my apartment, and I wasn't going to start some 2-bit little restaurant. It was much safer to start something big, and it was in those days, 25 years ago, it was £1 million. And so I put my 200 grand in, and I was lucky enough to get what was then a government loan guarantee scheme, which guaranteed another 200 grand, some what I call shark leasing of all the kitchen equipment. So I had about half the money, and the rest was done on beg, borrow, and steal. And there's a famous story that I actually got Sony, Honda, and All Nippon Airways in as they didn't know they were sponsors. And they lent me things. One of them gave me an upgrade to Japan. They lent me for old-fashioned television sets, and I made them my official sponsor and plastered over everything. I mean, it's a long story, but I'm not going to go now. But it's as a result of that, the world thought I was sponsored by these majors. So I got credit left, right, and center. And that's actually how I financed Yo Sushi, and ended up opening and turning away the equity investors, the sort of angel investors who I'd been sort of nurturing and who were hovering in the background, go, "Oh, now you're open, we'll come on in." I said, "No, thank you." And I ended up actually owning 95% of the business. I mean, it was amazing how it worked out.
Wow. And tell me a little bit about that. And then how did you get those connections to those brands?
Well, I wrote to Sony. I mean, I had a really great looking business plan, because it wasn't it was very show busy business plan. The front of it said, "If you want to make God laugh, show him your business plan." I actually put that on the front. People said, "You can't do that." I showed everybody the bank. They said, "At least you're realistic." And I literally called up All Nippon Airlines, called up Sony, chatted them up, and like you, I can do a bit of chat. And I said, all I want you to do is just lend me 4 of those big TV sets so I can put Japanese TV on in the front of the restaurants with the sound turned down. And I'll do whatever. I'll over deliver on everything. And All Nippon Airlines upgraded me once when I went to Japan, and Honda lent me one of those Honda Jaro canopies, which just one of them, just lent them for a few months. And we actually ended up with about 10 of them running around London, the best advertising I've ever done. And then I wrote them all the letters saying, look, I'm so grateful for what you've done that I'm going to make you my official sponsor. If I don't hear back from you in the next 7 days, I'll assume you agree. Of course, a big company never wrote back. So I put them over everything.
Wow. And you were, once you'd opened and you turned down the private equity, the angel investing, you were obviously uber confident that you didn't need their money.
You're never uber confident in a small business. It's like a pack of, those cards houses you used to build as a child. They're like that. The wind blows and, and it's above the level that the parents could help out or friends could help out, so you're never absolutely sure. But the first week and the second week, nobody came. It was a big frontage. It was in Poland Street in Soho. People walk past, very intimidating to walk in. You look through the windows, this great big long conveyor belt and robots serving the drinks and all this stuff going on. People think, what the hell is this? We covered it up so nobody could see it. And the second Saturday, Bruce Isaacs, who was my first general manager, came down to my office downstairs and he just went like this. He said, come here. And I walked up the stairs and there, on that Saturday night, there was a queue all the way down the block. I mean, I don't know how long it was, but and that didn't go away for 2 years. And why? Because I'd been good at marketing, because I'd had great contacts? No, because I'd spent the money. I sometimes say it slightly facetiously, throw away the marketing budget and spend all your money on doing something that when it opens, word of mouth, whatever that version is in this modern world, goes out and people talk about it. And, I always want the magic words, which are the magic words. And the same one later, much later, I'm sure we'll talk about it, when I opened the hotel, which had no natural light in the windows and the windows looking out into the corridors and the airports. And if I'd done, sushi and done market research and said, would you like to eat raw fish off conveyor belts with robots serving the drinks? Nobody's going to say yes. But those things, when people walked in, they went, this is so obvious. Why hasn't somebody done this before? And that's what entrepreneurs can do, because if you're a big company, you have to have a great big whiteboard and everything gets debated and it takes down this, that, and the other. But if you're an entrepreneur, you just got a vision and you go for it. You can do what you want.
Yeah. It was that thing, isn't it? Like with Henry Ford, if somebody had asked, with the car, and it was like, it would have been a faster horse. So, similar. So what would you say, Simon? I've been, looking at the Instagram page you started a year ago. That got me kind of reacquainted with you. Obviously knew who you were and what you do before that, but I can see you engaging with people on there with different ideas. What would you say to someone in a similar position today, i.e. they're sitting on an idea, but they're unsure if it's, the right time?
Yeah, there's a lot of different answers to that. But one, which I will be bold enough to put forward, is that I never met the person who went out to do what they really dreamed of doing in this short life and regretted it, regardless of whether they failed or succeeded, because you can always start up again, especially if you're younger. But I met many, many people who look back from later in life and sort of said, well, I wish I'd taken that opportunity when I had the chance. But more than that, I would also say on the other side, you have got to find a way, even if you're starting from a zero standing start, of raising the money to have enough money one way or the other. If it's through a sort of, and I use the word in its most beautiful way, some sort of confidence trick, a trick where, like I did with the Sony 100, and it's by mistake, that you give people confidence. You've got to be able to raise the money. And people ask me that question all the time. And really what I generally say is if you can't raise the money, that is a rite of passage. And if you can't raise the money and you can't do that, you probably shouldn't be starting a business. And every single entrepreneur who's ever existed has always gone through that process, and it ain't easy. And at the beginning, they say the 3 F's, friends, family, and fools, or people run up their credit cards. There's all sorts of ways to do it. But you've got to build something that looks so real. And that's what I did. So real that people believe you. And you can only have people believe you if you believe it yourself. And for the most part, I did believe that would be a success myself. I always say 90% I believed it. 5% I had my doubts, and 5% was sleepless nights of sheer terror. But I got it completely wrong. So you never really know.
No, but seeing that queue, I guess, 2 weeks later or whatever the timescale was, you went from 90% to 100% instantaneously.
It was like taking off very, very tight boots. It was just a sense of relief. Oh my goodness. And then of course the problems start because everybody wants what you've got. And, and there's people and, everything. And then of course, as soon as you are doing well, you think it's going to go wrong tomorrow. And I had to really good people in to run the day to day because, for me, if I went in and saw one thing wrong, I would have to walk around the block 3 times doing deep breathing exercises because I thought that nobody would ever come again because I'm an entrepreneur. And I always say entrepreneur and operator. And Robin Rowland, who I got in 3-4 years later, he was an operator. So he would have a pad and he would just prioritize everything and do it one thing at a time. And that's the way to do it. And you need both those people. You need the entrepreneur, fly by the seat of your pants, which to some extent I was, probably less so now. Then you need an operator who can do it. You need lots of different types. There was all sorts of different. The accountants, I remember in the old days, they always used to try to analyze the management of accountants and all that, management people. What was the secret formula to entrepreneurism? And of course, there isn't one. Everybody is different.
No. And at the start, were you very much hands-on then until you as you said earlier, you got the right people in to actually operate the business?
The first 3 years, megalomaniac control.
At that level.
Not a bad way to be. Not a bad thing to do. Annoying for other people. I later found out in one incarnation in my life, I was known as the steamroller. And embarrassing as it is now, I'm quite proud of it in a way that you absolutely know what you're doing, or you think you do. It's usually a delusion that you know what you're doing, but at least you have the delusion you believe and an absolute megalomaniac control. But then what I did well was further in, I handed over control, much to the surprise of everybody there who worked for us, to a guy called Robin Rowland, who went on to run it for the next years. And I did the right thing. I shut my door and let them get on with it, and it wobbled, and then it got to be stable, and they built it up.
Yeah. And when you say, those first couple of weeks, people could see in and see how it's all designed. How did your background in stage design, production, etc., shape how you built that brand experience, that like theatricality? Was that always part of the plan?
Well, it's showbiz, isn't it? Restaurants, showbiz are in many ways very, very similar to doing big rock and roll shows, being at the first night of Rod Stewart, which you designed, or Ozzy Osbourne, or whatever it is. You have your rehearsals and things go wrong and you've got technical issues and a lot of people to deal with. So that was the sort of showbiz side. And I think that is what it was exciting. And I always used to say there's a ziz in showbiz, which is a bit so yucky. They used to say in showbiz, there's a ziz in showbiz. But I always say there's a ziz in every business in the world if you can find it and appeal to people that way. But I'd had also 10 years in the television world, which was less creative. Some of it was creative, but most of it was international deals to sell television rights around the world. So I could read legal contracts. I had a small company. I could do accounts myself. On the showbiz side, I could draw. I could do technical drawing. I understood PR. I understood a lot of different things. And I had that balance, those two bits, which a lot of people say, oh, I'm really good at the creative, but I'm not good at the other. And I said, you can learn any of them. You have to at the beginning. And I learned everything. So I had those two bits that meshed together. And I think that was a key to, my success. That's a good dose of luck.
Always. I can actually remember taking my two daughters in to Yo Sushi here in Bournemouth for the first time, and they're now 16 and 18 and both have a lifelong love of sushi. But did you face any criticism early on, and if so, how did you handle it?
I don't think I did really. I mean, it was very exciting, the early days. The thing that I did learn early on, and I suppose I learned it from, I don't know where I learned it from, but that was that not to talk about how great food was and not to talk about how great the ambience was, because how good the sauce was or whatever. Anybody's going to say that. Nobody's going to believe you at an instinctive level. So I talked about the world and life and everything, as I am doing to you now, And of course, and my show business background. And of course, I got lots and lots of interests on a sort of personal level, which together with a very televisual opening, I remember the PR people said, we're going to do a well, we only didn't have that much PR people, but we did a one. And he said, I want to do East meets West. And I said, no, we're going to do world's longest conveyor belt sushi bar in a world that had never even heard of sushi bars, let alone conveyor belt sushi bars. So that was the thing, is to do that. And then, of course, the headlines we got were fabulous in the early days. We had Faye Mashler fast forward for the conveyor belt sushi bar. Somebody else, Sayonara McDonald's, and Adrian Gill famously. I hope this place sends all those mystery of the East. What do they say? I hope this place sends all those mystery of the East knife wielders back to Oklahoma with those knives between their legs, with their choppers between their legs.
Their choppers. It's gold dust, isn't it? Oh man. Was there a this might not work moment at all in those early stages, or as you said, like for 2 years there was a queue down the block? What happened after that? Was there a this might not work moment?
Early days, yeah. I mean, I was concerned the whole time, to be quite honest. You're on tenterhooks the whole time in the early days. We got a call from Harvey Nichols, from Dominic Ford at Harvey Nichols, who ran the 5th floor of Harvey Nichols, which is very fashionable from Ab Fab and everything in those days. And he said, could you come in? And we did that. And then we were in Selfridges. And then we opened another one in Finchley Road. And then we went into Edinburgh, still with me having sort of got it all together, which is miles away. And that absolutely bombed. And we spent a fortune on it. And it put us right back several years. So the threat was more that we'd make mistakes. Of course, you can be fashionable for 3 or 4 years, and then other people have got to come along. The Ziz works, and then the food's got to be great, 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 great. So, I would say in the first few years that we got venture capital in, I can't remember, 5, 6 years in, we got venture capital in and substantial money. And that was a big relief. But during that period working out, I would say the one I always say is that if you're playing dice, there were a couple of times when I had to roll a 3, maybe a 4, and I did roll a 3 or a 4. Maybe poker face or smiling face got us through some of those.
And was there one location that proved the model, or was it something else entirely?
Yeah, I think the first location proved it, together with Harvey Nichols and Selfridges. That first location in 1997, in that first year, in that summer, everybody came. I always say Madonna didn't come, but pretty much everybody else came.
Really?
And somewhere I've got a list. In fact, for my autobiography writing, I asked the office specific to look at that list from years back, because we wrote down all the celebs.
Did you? That would be cool. That would be
and
cool.
It was really interesting. I mean, everybody came, and I came and hosted a bit and went around and da. So no, that and of course that made it exciting, because and the other thing is, in the very early days, the word got out, and every single restaurateur I would go to say in the world came to see what this was all about. So they were supporting it, and yeah, it was very, very, what's the word? Fashionable, cool, trendy, and people would be going, Stu, have you never done a restaurant before? Can't believe it.
And as you alluded to, you eventually exited Yo Sushi. How did you know it was time?
Well, we made a couple of bespoke. I think we Edinburgh, and then after that we did the South Bank in London. And we suddenly we went, everything we went doing didn't turn to gold. And I remember we had a cracked floor in one of the big restaurants, and we couldn't figure out how to do it without closing it for 3 months, and this, that, and the other. And we needed money, and we knew. And Robin Rowland, who has come in as an employee at that stage, he said, this is ready for rollout. And we approached 3i, which is one of the big venture capitalists, and they weren't easy, because they want everything. And then there was a smaller VC, so more a boutique one called Primary Capital. A guy called Marek was the guy I dealt with there. And we did a deal with them. And I remember going to the the closing meeting. I mean, it was a big deal at that stage. I think it was nearly $1 million in legal fees to get that deal done. I can't remember what they put in, but they put in tens of millions to build it out. And my 95% went down to 25%, which I was totally happy to make. And I made my money out of the 25%, and indeed a royalty, which I've had since day one, and I still have today from Yo Sushi, 1% royalty, which is common knowledge. And anyway, I went to that closing meeting, and I remember, there were all these documents, 39 documents and all this. And I hadn't really believed it was going to happen. And Robin, I think, to his credit, led the cavalry charge there. And one of the lawyers took me aside and they said, we're going to put the money in your bank and it'll be wired. It'll be inside your bank account in 20 minutes. Could you give me the bank details? And in those days we had checkbooks. So I pulled my checkbook out and gave them the sort code and the current account and went, and there was champagne, and all the lawyers suddenly became nice people for the day. And we went home, and on my way home, I passed the cash machine. I thought I'd better check it out. So I went and checked out the cash machine. And I was there for so long looking at this number on the sorry, that's a mosquito, looking at this number on the screen, that there was a sort of queue form behind. There was this guy coughing and spluttering behind me. And eventually I turned to him and I said, excuse me, mate. I said, copper, look at this. And then his face sort of dropped. And, I tell that story sometimes. And I say, if this is for your viewers here, if anybody ever tells you that money doesn't make you happy, they're lying.
Brilliant. Oh man, wow! And I always remember chatting on this on the show to Richard Reed from Innocent, and him telling me, once they'd done the deal with Coca-Cola, he went home to tell his wife, and he was all excited and ready to celebrate, and she sent him to IKEA with a bookend to get a refund for like £25. He said, I'm literally stood there on a Friday night in IKEA in the return section, but on the Monday morning, him and his, I think it's 3 colleagues from Innocent, they started what's now Jam Jar Investments. They started a brand new business like 72 or 48 hours later. I was like, what did the timescale look like for you between that and YOTEL?
I started the next venture before we sold, actually, because Robin taken over only a short period before, and I'd shut my door and gone inside and thought, well, I'm not going to come out. I'm not going to go and be bossy, and and I got a big piece of paper out, which is what I do. And I started looking at what I could do with Yo, because I already had a sort of contract, a license contract, because the reason the license fee came about, the royalty, was that I had one small investor, and he was always on to me about my salary. Well, how is he going to take that? So I said, look, I'll just take 1% of turnover. And he said, oh, that suits me fine, no problem. If it gets bigger, you're welcome. And so I sat in my little room and thought, well, yeah, and I owned the brand, and it was licensed to Yo Sushi in the hospitality, food and beverage area. And I thought, well, what else can you do? And I looked at lots of other things, sort of hoping that maybe I could be a new Virgin or something like that. And I thought, well, the obvious thing to do is hotels. And I met a guy called Russell Malkasing. And he came in with a much bigger pad than me, because I can draw and he could draw much better. And between us, we sketched out, maybe 30, 40. We were going to do Japanese capsule hotels, sleeping pods for homes. It could have been anything. All I wanted it to be is something that when we opened, people would say, you've got to see this thing. And that's what happened when we eventually opened YOTEL in Gatwick Airport. Well, in fact, it happened when we eventually showed a full-size, I'm a believer in prototyping, and we'd made a full-size prototype of one of the hotel rooms and took it to an exhibition at Earl's Court called 100% Design. And it was a big thing about design. And we were the one that had the queue down the block. Everybody wanted to have a look inside. And people were saying, God, can I get one of these to have at home? Put the whatever. Yeah, that's sort of the thing. And then one of the TV companies all came down. It was good news, and I was good at blah 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 to the TV. And the headline was "Space: The Final Frontier."
Another great headline. Wow. And did you feel pressure at that time to top the success of Yo Sushi, or were you pretty laid back about the whole affair?
No, I don't think there was ever pressure to do better. the pressure for me has always come from survival. You know, it's the, I don't know about you, but it's the sort of, you know, things, you know, protect against things going wrong, you know, things going very right and being, you know, I always used to say, I never wanted to be very, very rich and very, very famous and very, very successful. You know, I always wanted to not be very, very poor. And that was my motivation, you know, and I had a sort of voice in my head when we did have Sushi was a success and YOTEL, and that voice did start up. You're going to be very, very rich and very, very famous and very successful. Unfortunately, I've been long enough in that world to know that this voice is just as big a delusion as this one. The thing says it's all going to go wrong. But, you know, fortunately, this one you need from time to time. So it gets you jumping out of bed in the morning. And when you go into a room, people sort of believe you. When you believe something yourself, they believe you. And then, you know, that's the way to do it.
And what was, kind of digressing slightly, but what was your background like growing up when it came to money and situation you were in, like with your parents growing up, etc.?
You've done these interviews before, haven't you?
Couple.
Very, very perceptive. You know, of course, that's where it all comes from, really. Well, my dad was a senior army officer, Brigadier Woodroffe, Indian Cavalry Association. And he grew up in a world where there was no inflation at all. And then he used to call it, you know, he's a bit of a posh guy. He used to call it ghastly inflation. And, you know, he was very tight, you know, and we had to account for every penny and this, that, and the other. And I suppose I was pretty resentful about that, you know. So I grew up, you know, feeling insecure about funds. And also my mum was from a lovely family there were 5 brothers and sisters. And they were all much, much better off than us and my dad on an army salary. And they were all well off. We used to go and stay in their rather nice houses and this, that, and the other. And I think there was a kind of bit of a kernel of truth in the fact that I wanted to be one of them, not one of us. You know, generally one's very loyal to your family, and I wanted to be one of them. So the seed was sown. And so I think the grit in the oyster and that oyster of that boy growing up. And my dad, who was a bit of a show off, you know, I inherited that from him at the time. In not such a good way sometimes, but, you know, that sort of larger than life, you know, covered up, you know, if you want to go deep, it would covered up a sort of low self-esteem that wanted to show the world and show my brother and all of that stuff. So I think, you know, you know, if anybody's listening and they're thinking about doing things, I always used to think that it was not people like me who would go off and do difficult things like this. And if you're actually listening, actually it is. It's just people like you and me. And if you're a bit chippy or a bit, you know, insecure or whatever, can be a pretty useful thing to have, or a bit angry even. So don't waste it. Put it to good use.
And do you think that's part of the reason why you went into those industries to start with as well? Be that, you know, putting on big productions, be that TV, etc.
No, I mean, the early days, I left school. I went to Marlborough, actually, Marlborough College, you know, very top school. And I left when I was 16. I think I might have been just 17. I always say 16 because it just sounds much more entrepreneurial. We'll stick to 6. Anyway, I left with 2 O-levels, 2 GCSEs. So I had nothing to, but it was just after Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band by the Beatles had come out. The Doors' first album had come out, and it was rock and roll. And, you know, I actually went to Cambridge Tech to study A-levels, and I didn't get the A-levels. And in fact, I got busted for drugs and spent 3 months in a detention center, which taught me never to ever break the law. And you can imagine the brigadier and my mum were absolutely distraught. You know, I apologize to my mother if your podcast is reaching into heaven. I'm so sorry that I put her through all that, but it really taught me. And I came out, and it was the first time I was really down on my luck. And I remember going into the little newsagent where we lived in Essex. I was an Essex boy, and I bought Motor Racing Today, Farmers Weekly, because I like cars and I like farming. I worked in a farm to earn a few bob. And I bought the Stage and Television Today, and in the back it said staff wanted professional, and it said it was going to pay 10 shillings a day, £0.50 a day, to work as a stage manager at the little theatre club in a musical, two-handed musical called Life as a Cell. And I went, and I absolutely loved it. And I could see how the money came in, and I could see the production and the show busy side. And that's how I got started. And I went from there to Richmond Theatre, and then the Royal Court Theatre as a stage manager. I learned a lot about lighting. And then rock and roll came along and went on the road as a roadie. And from there, I started a lighting company with a guy called Ricky Farr, and who put on the original Isle of Wight Festival. We got the job to do the sound and the lighting. He had the sound company, did it for a Rod Stewart tour. It's his company. I said, really worked for him. Rod said that your Ritz manager, Billy Gaff, said that he wanted a big white stage, and I'd worked at Richmond, so I knew where you bought the drapes and the rostrums and the this and that and the other. And I knew how to draw as well. So I drew up this stage and took it in and presented it to Rod. And he said, I remember him saying, he said, well, if it can travel, it's what I've always dreamt of. Let's do it. And 3 months later, we turned up at rehearsals and said, it's what I always wanted. And I remember going to a dinner party, I suppose it was in those days. And people said, what do you do? And I said, actually, I'm a stage designer, one in. And that's what I did for the next 10 years. And did a lot of the big bands all the way through to Live Aid, actually, in 1985.
Did you? I was just rewatching that's come out, on the TV. Oh.
My studio did. My Jeremy Thomas, my partner then, did most of it. The studio did it. But I remember suddenly that whole business, the whole rock and roll business, had grown up and was now being run by accountants rather than sort of, wild boys. And I remember thinking, and I'm sure none of your listeners ever have had this thought, but I remember thinking, I've got to get out of this business before I get found out. And that's what I did, imposter syndrome. And I got out. And that's how I got into the television world from there. For a year in the wilderness, but then I got into TV. That was my story.
What a great story. What other artists did you work with at that time, Simon?
Well, the very early days, you have to cast your mind back. It was the first tour I ever did was Jethro Tull, the Moody Blues. I traveled all over Europe on a private airplane with the Osmond brothers doing the lighting, Cat Stevens, the Rolling Stones doing a spotlight for the Rolling Stones, the Faces, a lot of bands of those days. And then later on, big shows as a stage designer, big shows for, everybody from Madness to Ozzy Osbourne to, can't remember all now, but there were Elton we did stuff for. And, it was everybody. But, I went from being, the working class of rock and roll into where the pop stars were the upper class, if you like, to work my way back up again and found my niche, sort of mid-Atlantic media kid niche, which became my world, having come from this rock posh background at the beginning, posh but impoverished.
If you hadn't taken that leap at 45 into entrepreneurship, where do you think you'd be today? What would you be doing?
It's the big question. It is the big question. I don't know is the answer. I mean,
do you think you always meant to build something? Do you think you were always meant to do that?
Well, I think I was unemployable because I was difficult. I suspect possibly I would have found a way to start up and do something else. I suspect I wouldn't have had that. I had one chance to do something, became a big deal. And I'm grateful to this day. I really am very, very grateful. That's why I try to spread it around a bit if I can. Well, I try to spread it around, full stop. I consider myself extremely fortunate.
And are you one of these people who believe that entrepreneurship is something you're born with or something that anybody can learn at any stage in their lives?
I think you can. I think most stuff. I think that both things have an influence. Felix Dennis is a publisher, and there's a poem he wrote that I really like, which is the first couple of verses are ideas we've had them since Eve first met Adam, but take it from me, execution's the key. Good fortune. The truth is, the harder you work, the more that you sweat, the luckier you get. You want to hear the other verse?
Yeah, please do. Yeah.
The money, go find a likely investor to get what you need, you toadies to greed. The talent, go find it, but first wine and dine it. It's tedious work with a talented jerk to win it. You've got to be in it, but never be late to quit and cut bait. Expansion is vanity. Profit is sanity. Overhead begs and it walks on two legs. The first step, just do it and bluff your way through it. Remember to duck. Godspeed and good luck.
Love it. So that is that in his book, Felix Dennis' book?
It's the same name. Felix Dennis is one of the best of all those books. Is called How to Get Rich.
Yeah,
and
I've read
I
that.
like it anyway. But he also wrote a poem by the same name, so you have to search
Oh, I
around.
see. I've read his book. Okay, great poem.
Very good book, and it's a good poem.
Yeah,
Because it is kind of simple business for the most part. People are complicated, and the most complicated one of the lot, me, probably you.
couple of questions to finish up, and then I've got a little quick fire round, Simon. Potential of AI. How do you think it can change the game for entrepreneurs over the next decade, or even quicker than that, the way things are going?
I feel incredibly fortunate to be here seeing how it will all unfold. I'm totally positive about what will happen in the long term for the human race. The idea of superhumans, absolutely, I embrace. You can't put the clock back. You've got to embrace what happens. How we spread more fairly the benefits that AI will bring the world out across all the different areas so that you don't have these extremes of rich and poor in every sense in the West and across the world, I think is the really great challenge of our time. And risking being political, I do believe that it is almost impossible to govern for anybody. Whoever we vote into power is always going to not work out, because the system that we've got, 400, 1,000 people in Britain arguing with each other all day long, it just simply doesn't work. And I think my political view is that when digital voting arrives, that we will realize that we, the people, can vote for issues, not for political parties. And I do believe that with AI, what will actually happen in the much longer term is that AI will assess not our income, but our personal wealth. And we won't even pay tax according to our personal wealth, rather like council tax levels. We will pay for services direct. So we'll pay for the health system. We'll pay for education, one education system. We'll pay for roads according to our wealth. And if people don't like it, they can leave, and that's what we're saying. And if the people will take the decisions, so they can't complain about them. And the press will support the people, presumably, because they buy the newspapers. And if the people make bad decisions, I think Brexit probably wasn't right, but that's my personal view. I'm not saying I'm right. But if they make bad decisions, they will soon learn to make good decisions. And talking of learning, that's really trying to solve education in 4 years to term of a political party is impossible. We have to make plans for 10 or 15 or 20 years, and then we'll come through this difficult time. That's what I think will happen.
It's another podcast there, isn't it? It's fascinating, isn't it? It really is. What does legacy mean to you now at this stage to you? Are you building something again? You mentioned your book. Talk to me a little bit about that, Simon.
I'm lucky. I don't have I don't really care. I won't be here for a kickoff. But two things I have is, one is I won't be here for a kickoff, so it doesn't really matter. And secondly, at the risk of being a bit edgy here, is that, do you know how many little dubris there were at the point of your creation? There were between 30 and 40 million people, sperms, competing for a chance at this life. And you won. I won. You won. So we are lucky. We're lucky fuckers. Really, we are to have had a chance at life. And for me, that's good enough. And I don't want to, one thing I can tell you is that when you get older, I don't anyway spend my time looking back at what I did and being proud of this, that, and the other. I think the legacy is, who you've become. Have you become a better person for it? Have you, all of that? And that's what makes you feel good.
Agreed. No, I like that. Couple of questions to finish up, quick fire questions. First thing that comes into your head. For you, Simon, what is an entrepreneur?
First thing that comes into my head is difficult. What is an entrepreneur is a risk taker who is so obsessed with their idea that they have to do it because they want to see what it's like.
Like it. What is a scale-up business?
What I think is that opening some little business is not as safe as opening one which has an enormous amount of potential. And so the bigger you can go and the more money you can raise and the more you can do, there's pros and cons to all of these things. But generally, my thing is go bigger, but aim high. It's safer.
What do we need to do to get more scale-up businesses? What's lacking?
I can't do anything. And one of the things that I've learned in this, we live in a world where everybody has an opinion on what we should or shouldn't be doing. And I would rather say, I don't know. I simply don't know. All I know is that I can do my little bit. And if you follow me on social media, every day I'm talking about what experience I had and what I learned from it and passing that on. And that's all I can do. But to go and be political and stand up on a platform and say, you should be doing this and you should be doing that, I don't want to do it. Apart from anything else, everybody's going to kick your bum. I can tell you what that, and I can tell you what I think, a bit like Nostradamus. I can tell you what I think may happen in the world ahead, and hopefully that'll be inspiring and influence people. But that's all I can do. That's why whoever it was, I can't remember his name, wrote How to Win Friends and Influence People. Influence people is the thing, not tell them what to do.
Last question, and this can be from somebody now or someone in the past. Who inspires you when it comes to entrepreneurship?
Well, I mean, it's very boring, but Richard Branson, it was the first to do it, and he didn't wear a tie and he didn't wear cufflinks. And I thought if he can do it, anybody can do it. Anybody who get even the smallest entrepreneur starting a window cleaning company, I'm a total fan of anybody who gets up, steps out of their comfort zone and goes and does anything for reward for what they do rather than for the time they put in.
A fascinating life you clearly have, and some amazing successes in there that are very inspirational, that I know will resonate with our audience. As I say, I came across you again through your Instagram page. Is that the easiest way for people to connect with you and to learn from your experiences? I know you mentioned you got a book coming out in spring 26. Was that right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, no, we're all the social media. I think it's at Simon Woodroffe, WOODROFFE. And then there's yo.co.uk, which takes you to everything. And very welcome to come on board and be part of the revolution in the best sense of the word.
Amazing. Simon, thank you very much indeed.
If this conversation resonated with you, don't just sit there, act on it. Make sure you follow or subscribe for more game-changing conversations, and remember, the only thing standing between you and your business breakthrough is the decision to screw it and just do it.